A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
A conversation shortly. We will open our talkback lines. You might like to interact with our special guest today, and we're going to be talking about one of those very special freedoms. And as you know, we've been monitoring the ways that our freedoms have been evaporating because there are some activists that continue to keep Christians in their sights. Well, our special guest today says an AVO, an apprehended violence order, has been taken out against her for making a political statement. What are the freedoms we enjoy as Australians? We do sometimes like to list them. There's freedom of thought, there's freedom of speech, religious freedom, academic freedom, and freedom of political communication. A focus today on that freedom, a freedom of political communication. Just imagine that if in a democratically elected parliament an opposition were not able to question and challenge the policies of the government, or candidates weren't able to challenge different ideas that were being presented to the Australian people. Well, one of the foundations of a democracy is freedom of political communication, because it maintains a platform for a robust battle of ideas. Our special guest today is Kirralie Smith, who leads Binary. She says activists are trying to shut down her freedom to defend girls and women, using the courts as a weapon, and her public voice has an outspoken political dimension. She's one of the very courageous women standing up to the rampant campaign to de-gender Australian society. Kirralie Smith, let me say a special welcome back to 2020.
It's always great to be with you, Neil.
Kirralie, let's start with the issues that are going on in your life. As much as you're able to talk about those, and I'm not sure where there might be some things that you've got to be very cautious about even communicating, but there's an activist who's taken out an AVO against you, and you believe this is the first time an AVO law has been used in relation to political speech. Give us an insight here. How are you feeling?
Well, it's quite bewildering, I think is the best word I can use, Neil. So as you said, I'm the spokeswoman for an organisation called Binary. We exist to defend biological sex-based rights and realities, and we are a third-party political campaigner. So we're registered in Australia and New South Wales and other states to join in political campaigns around election time. There's very strict laws about this in our country, and rightly so. And we meet the requirements to be a third-party political campaigner. And so everything I do in the capacity of spokeswoman for Binary is to advocate, especially for women and girls' sex-based rights, but for parental rights, for child safeguarding. And I make really I think obvious statements, but some are calling this violence. I say that men can't be women. I say that men don't belong on female sporting teams. Apparently now that could be considered as violent or harassment speech in this country. And so to go back to March last year, in 2023, I was visited by the police. They issued some applications for apprehension of violence orders because I identified males playing in female sporting teams. Now, some of those AVOs were withdrawn. One went to hearing last October in the local court where I live. It was denied because to me and to the judge at the time, it seemed quite obvious that my actions, my political advocacy does not rise to the level of violence, which the AVO law is meant to protect people in situations from violence, harm, stalking, threats, intimidation and the like. But this same person has now put in an application for an appeal, and that was heard last week. Or the week before, I think it was last week. And that has been, so we don't have a judgment issued, but they're appealing on the basis that my actions in using public information from the public domain and then using that in my advocacy as an example or a case study for what's happening in Australia and for advocating towards Football New South Wales and Football Australia equals violence, and therefore I should have an apprehension of violence order imposed on me.
So, Kirralie, usually when we think of an AVO, an apprehended violence order, these are in relation to domestic violence, and there might be lots of listeners who are aware of someone either within their family or in their community who's had one of these AVOs, and obviously there are going to be times when the ability to be able to issue an AVO is sometimes going to be considered to be, someone rorting the system here, because of course this isn't violence and people do take sides depending on who's been issued an AVO. The legislation was enacted to protect victims of violence, but as you say, now words are considered violence if you're even speaking as an advocate on behalf of girls and women. That's got to be disturbing. That's disturbing.
Oh, it's really disturbing, considering I never swear. I've never directed any of my advocacy towards an individual. It's always been towards officials and the Federation of Football Australia itself. There's no threats made within my advocacy. It purely is asking questions about why is there a policy that allows male bodies on the female soccer fields? Why aren't the females allowed to protest? Why aren't they allowed to object to this? Very reasonable questions, one would think, and that are all fall within the framework of political advocacy. And as you said at the top, that we must be able to challenge policy in this country because that's what a democracy is based on. And yet here I am being threatened and intimidated with legal action. That's just one legal action. This is my 7th time in court, Neil, for doing this, and I still have 2 court cases ahead of me.
Someone who is offended can simply apply, and all of a sudden you find yourself in court. There's something wrong with the system. Is that the way you'd see it too?
I definitely think there's something wrong with the system, Neil, and there's many levels of it. One aspect of the system is, that it's if a male says he's female, then he gets treated accordingly. I think that's a really big problem when it's meant to be based on evidence and facts, and it clearly is not. And then when the AVO law is being used in, I believe, a very inappropriate way, and not a way that the Parliament intended when they first wrote this legislation, that we're in very troubled waters as a country. And considering we have things like the misinformation, disinformation bill hanging over our heads, and we have the e-safety commissioner who has also tried to stop my speech by removing posts and removing a Facebook page that I had 47,000 followers on, all for saying that men are not women.
And it's very one-sided, Kirralie, because it seems to be that someone now can take out an AVO against you because they're offended. And they can do that very easily, and I think probably with no cost. And then when it's going through the courts, you're paying for all of your defence, but the person who's taking out that AVO or taking you to some of these lower level courts, their costs are covered. That's unfair, isn't it?
Well, it feels very unfair from my perspective. I've had to raise over $100,000 so far to defend myself in these cases. And let me be clear, the AVO has not been awarded at this stage. It's an appeal because the AVO was denied. So now we're waiting on the judge's decision that will come in November to let me know whether or not she will uphold that denied AVO or whether she will award an AVO against me. And if she does, then we're yet to see what the conditions of that apprehension of violence order may be.
Okay, so we're waiting for the appeal. And if the appeal comes in favour of the person who's taking out this AVO, we've got then perhaps clearly a breach of even our constitutional guidelines around what free speech is all about and free political communication, which is where our conversation is today. So there's something big riding on the judgment here.
Yeah, well, this isn't just about me, Neil. I can't go into details, but part of our defence is that there is an implied freedom of political communication within the Constitution, and that this could have ramifications for politicians in our country and other third-party political campaigners, and it could greatly restrict the debate that must go on around public policy.
And Kirralie, just remind us here, because, for listeners who are thinking, who is this politically outspoken person? you are governed in some ways and pretty significantly by your Christian foundation. Those beliefs that you have, we're created in the image and likeness of God. Men are men, women are women. And because we've now blurred the lines, we've got all sorts of challenges that are ahead of us, and somebody has to stand up and speak some common sense. Give us some thoughts here on a faith foundation for listeners who might be thinking, where is the Christianity in all of these things?
Yeah, look, I have a Bachelor of Theology. I've been a Christian for over 35 years now. My whole life is governed by the Lordship of Jesus Christ. I love him. I serve him. My family love him and serve him. We have a great relationship with him and other believers. And it's really important. Right from the opening pages of the Bible, God said he created them male and female he created them, and they were very good. And right throughout the scriptures, he upholds this. Jesus reiterates that in his own teaching ministry, and there's never any deviation. And surprise, surprise, science confirms what the Bible says, and that is that there is only male and female. Yes, there are differences or disorders that happen, but it's always male with disorders of female characteristics or vice versa. And so it is the foundation of my faith. It is also what science has evidence to us in 2024. We know that every cell with a nucleus in our body is either male or female. You can't have both. And it's really disturbing that, so this is an attack on freedom of speech, it's an attack on biblical and religious freedoms, and it's also an attack on the scientific evidence.
And it's not as though there's only a handful of supporters that think the way you think, because in the time that we've been talking, the number of subscribers to your regular emails has grown to more than 100,000. So there's 100,000 other like-minded people who are supporting the sorts of things you're standing for, Kirralie Smith. Kirralie, let's take a call from Adam in Marysville in Victoria. Hey, Adam, welcome.
Hey, Kirralie. First and foremost, I'm coming from a male's perspective here. I just admire you for your strength and courage to stand up for this thing, against this. That's the first thing. And my I used to play Aussie rules football, which is a full-on contact sport. I know it's different to soccer, but the thought of running out onto a football field of any type and, number one, taking the spot of a female, and, we're physically stronger, so just knowing how hard it is to play those games, and
Adam, there's a lot of people who'll be recognising there's so much common sense in the things you're reflecting here. But Kirralie, your thoughts here for Adam?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And it's obvious, isn't it, when you talk to me? I know you're a man. I don't even have to see you, because we have, as human beings, an innate God-given ability to recognise males and females in most situations. Look, Adam, unfortunately in this country there are male bodies playing in the female divisions of AFL, and I've had a coach with a 17-year-old on her team who was basically crumpled under a bloke who ran up her back. I think it's to take a mark or something. Excuse my ignorance, because I don't know much about AFL. And that's exactly what happened. A great big bloke who identifies as female got onto the team and injured this girl, and we're hearing these sort of comments and reports around the country every weekend when sport is on, and it's really devastating for those girls. Many of them now self-exclude. They refuse to play because if they speak up, they are threatened with actions like what I've been faced with fines, expulsions, suspensions, and the like. And so it is a really disturbing time in our country. And let me say, what's the point of having a male or a female division if they're going to disregard it and allow males to play in it anyway? It really doesn't make any sense. The whole reason we had these divisions in the first place was to protect women, and that's what we need to get back to.
Adam in Marysville, I want to thank you for those contributions, those thoughts. We're going to take some more calls. Adam, thank you so much. Let's take another call. Tim is in Redbank Creek in Queensland. Hey, Tim, welcome.
Neil, Kirralie, Yeah, Kirralie, I was listening to you with Lyle the other day on his podcast on ADH, and I think Lyle mentioned that sometimes we're too worried about being nice rather than speaking the truth. And that really resonated with me because although I try to do both at the same time, sometimes when you tell people about what's happening politically, you say, you know, like when Queensland passed those laws that you could change your gender on your birth certificate, I told a few people that, and I had a lot of pushback particularly from politically disengaged people. I'm not interested in politics. Well, you know, almost a year on from that, we were at a school sports day, and I heard some mothers discussing it, and one of the mothers was actually from a family that I'd spoken to her husband about this very issue, and they were astounded that all this stuff had happened and they didn't hear about it. And I said, well, actually, I did try to tell your husband about that a while ago, but nobody wanted to know. So I think I find myself too being apprehensive in telling people when I hear about this kind of thing happening, because I just feel that, there's just going to be so much pushback. No one wants to hear it. But how should we respond given that many people, especially Christians, can feel that way about sharing these kinds of issues that are happening in our community with people, even people in the church?
You're making a good point there, Tim. Kirralie?
Yeah, awesome, Tim, and well done to you for trying, because I know it is really difficult. But there's a few things I want to say in there, and the first is that Jesus said of himself, he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. And so the truth is not a concept, it's not an idea, it's not an opinion, and it's not a political position. The truth is a person, and his name is Jesus. And so I don't think we should ever compromise the truth in the name of love or kindness or being nice, because Jesus never did. He called sin. He called it out. He was always compassionate around calling it out and respectful, but he never compromised the truth, because he is the truth. And so that is what emboldens me every day to be able to speak the truth, that it is not kind to lie to someone. It is not kind to deceive someone. So the only pathway that we have, the only way, is the truth, and the truth is Jesus. So the truth is that males can't change sex, neither can females. I have great compassion for people who are confused about their gender or their identity, and every human being goes through a stage in their life where you question your identity. I just think there's far better ways to do it than to medicalise or lie to someone and convince them that they can change their identity by putting on a costume or taking some drugs or having some surgery, because it actually won't result in them changing their sex at the end of the day. So it's it's very cruel to lie and deceive people. When it comes to people who are politically disengaged, I guess you just have to measure the temperature of the conversation, stick to the truth, stick to the facts, stick to a compassionate stance, but don't compromise on the truth. And that's the best advice I can offer. You won't always win friends or influence people with that stance, because Jesus didn't. You know, they actually picked up stones to stone him, and he told us we have to take up our cross every day if we want to follow him. So I think it's coming to a day and age in many situations in our country and in our world where Christians have to either choose the truth, the way, the truth and the life, choose love, don't lie, don't deceive, don't compromise, and there'll be cost. There will be cost, but it's worth it.
Tim, in Redbank Creek, thank you so much for another great contribution. Taking calls on 1800 316 316. Let's take some more. Tony is in Adelaide. Hey, Tony, welcome.
Yeah, g'day, how you going? Just listening to some of the comments. I think we've got a couple of issues here. Firstly, you've got a woke group. You've also got people with gender identity beliefs, and then you've got Christian beliefs where I'm not particularly religious, but the thing with a lot of people who are in that group, they may not particularly be religious, but the challenges you've got here is, first of all, you've got then you've got gender identity. We all know that from my release that you are either male or you're female, but you can identify whatever you like. Where the problem happens to me is that where you have, let's say, schoolgirls, where we've seen recently, that are now having to face girls and women, and the opportunity to be able to be feeling that they're in a safe place. Then if you want to, you go down the path of Ben Shapiro, you go down the path of those sorts of radical conversations where people say, what is a woman, without using the word woman? And that's pretty well answerable.
Tony, making some good points here. Let's bring Kirralie in. Kirralie, your thoughts here for Tony?
Yeah, great points, Tony. And let me say too, like, I am a Christian, but Binary as an organisation is not a Christian organisation. We are a deliberate secular organisation, and we incorporate, anyone who agrees that sex-based rights and realities are worth fighting for. And many people agree with you, Tony, that males should never be allowed access to female spaces such as change rooms, toilets, rape crisis shelters, prisons. The list goes on, because we have sex segregation for a reason. Women are vulnerable when it comes to males in those spaces. We've deliberately segregated those spaces, and they need to remain so, not based on someone's feelings, because that's what gender identity is. It's about a feeling, it's about a perception. It's not measurable, it's not quantifiable. It's simply a preference or a perception. And until recently, no one had a problem with men who wanted to cross-dress or women who were tomboys. It's the issue now of these lies and deceptions that a man is actually a woman and deserves access to our spaces. And that's where we draw the line and say absolutely not.
Tony, just before I let you go, you say you're not particularly religious, but this sort of conversation clearly strikes a chord with you because there's some level of common sense. The fact that there is a religious foundation here, how do you fit all that in with your not particularly religious position, but understanding there's also a religious significance in what we're talking about?
Well, I think, I'm ex-military as well, so for me, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole sort of environment, but for me, it doesn't come down to religion or lack of religion. It comes down to common sense and being able to have a freedom of speech without fear of being persecuted or repercussions of what's going through in these sort of cases. And I think this is a really good test example of how people can have a freedom of religion or freedom of speech, and then you have someone who says, my feelings are hurt. It doesn't mean they're right, it means their feelings are hurt. You're not going to get cancer for your feelings being hurt. But here we go, now you're being cancelled on.
Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. You might like to join into our conversation. In fact, Kirralie, I think we should just keep on taking some calls and see where listeners want to take our conversation. Alex is in Melbourne. Hello, Alex. Thanks for waiting so patiently.
Thank you, Neil and Kirralie. God help Kirralie in her stand for the truth and strengthen her. Yes, I heard what I heard. I hope I heard right. That the police came to Kirralie to take her to the magistrate's court, where the magistrate simply dismissed the matter because it wasn't a court matter as he or she saw it. I'm just wondering who is giving these orders to the police in such a matter to even come to your place. There's a disconnect there.
All right, just you might like to fill us in on the story here, Kirralie. Police arrived at your front door and escorted you to the police station?
No. So two police officers came to my home in March in 2023 to issue me with paperwork for the applications of the apprehension of violence orders, which had been issued by some police in Burwood, and then the police in my area came to my home, issued me with those summons to attend court. One was withdrawn before we went to court. One, I turned up at court. We spent a lot of money in our preparation. It took 6 months. The police withdrew that application as we stood up before the magistrate at 2:00 in the afternoon. The third application did go to a full hearing, so I had to sit in court all day before a magistrate as both sides presented their case. Then we had to wait from October to January this year, where the magistrate denied the AVO after she considered all the material that we presented. And then this person has appealed that decision. And so it went to court again last week, and we had to sit through a whole day hearing, representing some of the material, and now we're awaiting judgment of whether the AVO will continue to be denied or whether that will be overturned and the AVO will be awarded.
Alex, anything further to add there?
Again, I say God help you, Kirralie, and strengthen you, because it seems like there's no guideline for these orders, or there. I can't work it out. Anyway, it doesn't seem right. Anyway.
Alex, I want to thank you for your contribution to our conversation today. 1-800-316-316. It's God help you, Kirralie Smith, but it's God help Australians, because if words and political advocacy are found to be equivalent to violence, requiring an AVO to be issued, that won't bode well for any Australian, will it?
Well, that's correct, and I think Trump made this kind of line famous in saying that they're not really after me, they're after you, and they're not trying to silence me, they're trying to silence you. I'm the one they're picking on at the moment, but I just stand in the way of many, many other Australians who feel and think and say the same thing. So it's very important that I stand up and defend myself in these cases, because it is much bigger than just myself. I'm not here as Kirralie Smith, I'm here as Kirralie Smith, spokeswoman for Binary, a political advocacy organisation, and we must be able to challenge and debate these policy areas.
Well, we're traversing the nation, people calling in from everywhere. Let's take another call. Robert is in Townsville in North Queensland. Hey, Robert, welcome.
Hey, how you going?
Good. What are your thoughts?
Hey. Yeah, well, my thoughts are this. When they had that voting for gay marriage, I had on my shirt, I had written, preserve the family tree, vote no. And, of course, you can imagine that got a bit of flack from people around. One particular person who was obviously gay said, oh, yeah, that's typical, blah, 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 blah. And I simply said to him, I said, look, mate, God loves you as much as anybody else. I said, Christ died on the cross for everybody. I said, mate, he says he doesn't hate you people. You got to understand he loves you too. And I had a conversation with him which went in depth, and anyway, at the end of it, we shook hands, and he was just gobsmacked. He just didn't have he had nothing to come back. What I'd like to sort of suggest is that with this change room thing where, males are there with my granddaughters and stuff like this in the same change rooms, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, and I'd like to see a vote about that, is just maybe we've got to get back to what that movie said many years ago, that said a little kid comes up and said, men have penises and women have vaginas. Maybe we got to put on the doors of the male and females penises and vaginas just to make it black and white, I mean, what do we do? I don't know.
I think Arnold Schwarzenegger was the star of that movie. Hey, Kirralie, your thoughts here for Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Robert, and good on you for, dignifying that man and having that conversation with him, because I think that's really important at the individual level, is to engage in those conversations. And like you, in the plebiscite, I voted no, and I warned at that time that if we redefine words like marriage, we would end up redefining other words, and that is exactly where we are today, and that is exactly why we started Binary, because the fallout of that same-sex marriage campaign isn't just now that same-sex couples can legally marry in this country. It's that words have been and are continuing to be redefined, and that is a very, very, very big problem for our country. And so you and I use plain language, and we know what a male and a female is, and it does need to be rewritten back into law, because Julia Gillard in 2013 removed those definitions of male and female. Hence, we're in the situation we are now, where anyone can identify however they like, and we have no legal rights. In fact, in Australia, women don't exist in law. There are no legal protections for us.
Wow. Robert in Townsville, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation today, as we're talking about the political communication that we take for granted as one of our freedoms, that may be another one that's evaporating. Let's take another call. Nick is in New South Wales. Hey, Nick, thanks for waiting patiently.
That's all right. It's ironic that Jesus said of this generation, not our generation, but the generation he was in, the scribes and Pharisees were fickle. He said, this generation's like the children playing in the marketplace saying, oh, we've blown the flute for you and you've not danced. We've mourned to you and you did not weep. It's like playing, marriages and funerals. And he's virtually saying you're totally fickle in whatever direction you go. I just think it's ironic that, children, there's no boundaries with the change rooms, but then someone's put an AVO or attempted to put an AVO on Kirralie. How ridiculous! So they're totally fickle in the sense that, well, we don't want to allow these boundaries over here because of this so-called, their conception of sexuality. But when it comes to you talking about it, I don't want to even hear about it. They're just saying, it's like I say, a violence order. It's absolutely ridiculous and totally fickle.
Nick, good insights there. Who are the boundaries around? Well, the boundaries are around you, Kirralie Smith, to try and keep you quiet. Your thoughts here for Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And look, we're seeing that not just in this instance, obviously, but we do see that. And it is fickle and it is feelings and emotion-based. Some people have more privileges in this country than others. And let me say, it's men who identify as women seem to have far more privileges than women. And let me also say, we talk about children and that we have to protect them, and we do. We need safeguards for children, and we don't let them cross the road without a lollipop person, on the zebra crossing. We need to give consent when they're going on a school excursion. We need to govern their diets and their sleep times, and yet they're saying that children, can have adult people of the opposite sex in their change rooms. We're saying that if they want to identify as something other than their sex, they can do that. The mind really boggles here, and it shows how ideologically captured some aspects of our society are, primarily the political and the justice systems and the media. Not Vision Radio, of course, but a great deal of the media are so captured that they'll go along with these lies and deceptions, even though it doesn't make any sense. It's plain to anyone with eyes, and it really is putting our children at risk, and women and girls in particular.
Nick in New South Wales, thank you so much for your call. 1800 316 316 to join in our conversation. Let's take another call. Graham is in Tasmania. Hey, Graham, welcome.
Good morning, or good day. Look, why can't we get a reverse wrist lock on this sort of thing? Now, if someone's a teacher or such crap has been preached and taught, why can't we take them to court for offending us?
I know this is one of those questions that comes up, and it doesn't make any sense. But Kirralie, have you got a response here for Graham? Because some people say, well, why isn't it happening the opposite direction? It's just not, is it? And I don't think it's allowed.
Right. It's not. I feel your pain very literally, Graham, and it would, that's a whole other conversation, but there are no protections. There's no protections. There's only protections for these certain protected groups, and we're not allowed to ruffle any feathers for those groups, but they can do whatever they like pretty much to heterosexual, Christian, male or female, just ordinary citizens in Australia. We have no legal ramifications. I'm not allowed to claim costs in the court. I can't countersue on these things unless they break laws and are violent or defame me or something like that. But it's really frustrating that there really are different levels in our society of people who get protections and those who don't.
Graham, a great question and contribution to this conversation today. Thank you so much for your call. Let me ask you, because there are some bills that are being debated, misinformation, disinformation. I think this is federal, but no doubt states are looking at their own issues around that too. Is this something that's sort of feeding into putting the clamps on people who want to be able to have their say? And of course, there is no absolute freedom of speech, but is this going too far? What are your thoughts, Kirralie?
Oh, absolutely. This disinformation bill will basically make the government the arbiter of truth, that they will get to determine what is true and what is not, and it will impact political speech greatly in this area, and they want to have much tighter reins than they already do over social media and over commentary in the media. It's very disturbing, and it is very reminiscent of what George Orwell wrote in 1984. He actually wrote the book in 1948, but that the government will now decide what is and what isn't truth. And for us as Christians, that is unacceptable. While there may be Christians or faith-based leaders in our government, the government is not a Christian institution, and it's not meant to be. But they don't determine who the truth is. Jesus is the truth, and we can't allow that sort of governance over us, because that becomes a totalitarian state. It becomes a dictatorship where no democratic dissent is allowed, and that's not the country that we live in.
And open to abuse no matter who is in power. So just in case you're thinking, well, it's the Labor Party in power or it's the Liberal National Coalition in power, no matter who's in power, the opportunity for abuse of being able to, as you say, being the arbiter of what is truth, that it puts it in the hands of an individual.
Absolutely, and it's dangerous because everybody has political leanings, ideological leanings. Truth is absolute. It's not something that's fluid or changes with the wind, and yet we already live in a society where that's being challenged. But to allow the government to have that absolute control is a very dangerous thing indeed.
Kirralie, is it fair to say that in Australia we're lacking those courageous political leaders who will actually stand up and say what is true, say what is right, and, take the flack which no doubt would be coming to them? But there's a little bit of lack of courage in our political leadership right now. What are your thoughts here?
I don't think there's a little lack of courage. I think there's a gross lack of courage in our nation, that they're beholden to the media and polling and really false narratives of, what the Australian public is interested in and what they're not interested in. And they need to get back to representing the people. They need to represent the people that have elected them and listen to the people who have elected them. And on this particular issue, the vast majority of Australians know and understand and believe that males are males, female are female, no one can change their sex, and females deserve sex-based rights, and children need safeguarding. And yet politicians across the board have no appetite whatsoever to address this issue. They do everything they can to avoid it. But let me also say, in one encouraging piece, there are some individuals that are speaking out, and that whether it be the Libertarians, some in One Nation, of course our friend Lyle Shelton with Family First, and there are some Liberal National members. But the National Party recently decided to make it part of their policy, their national platform, that they would advocate to reinstate the definitions of male and female with the Sex Discrimination Act. So credit where credit's due. Thank you to the National Party and to David Gillespie in particular, who led that motion. But there's still a very long way to go, because we need that appetite in the Labor and the Liberal Party, because they're the ones who have the power and the numbers to make the changes.
A long way to go. The American election is coming up just a week away, and there is a very big divide between both sides there, the Republicans and the Democrats, over some of these sorts of issues. Are you aware of this sort of thing? Because this is not just an Australian issue. This is rampant across the Western world. The US dealing with their own issues around sex-based rights. What are your thoughts about, people standing in the US election? Since we're not voting here, but we can look at it and say we can be keen observers as to what's happening. What are your perceptions of what's going on for the presidential election?
Oh, look, absolutely. Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden, the Democrats, have been an absolute disaster for female sex-based rights in America. And thankfully, there's a large cohort of female athletes who have really brought this into the spotlight, dragged it in, and really highlighted how damaging those policies have been. Donald Trump is the one voice in the wilderness here who stands up and says he will get this really dreadful gender ideology out of our schools. He will come out at full force. He's very plain speaking when it comes to protecting the children. and women's sex-based rights. And so regardless of whatever else we think about him, it's him and him alone who will have the courage and the fortitude to make the changes that are necessary. And often where America goes, we follow. So I hope that it will embolden some of our politicians just to speak the truth plainly. We don't need to fluff it up. We don't need to dress it up. It's just plain facts.
We'll squeeze in one last call. Graham is in Cleveland in Queensland. Hey, Graham, welcome.
Good morning, Neil. Good morning, Kirralie. I'd just like to, firstly, Kirralie, great work, and I know there are other organisations alongside you doing this great work as well, but it's just, this all flies in the face of biblical truth and scientific evidence and even common sense, as I think one of the other callers mentioned. But I did hear you talk about the misinformation and disinformation, and I think this is a thread and it's a bigger problem, throughout our legislation, because in Queensland we had this recently, the Respect at Work legislation, and they use subjective terms and loose terminology like, if it's something is likely to cause offence, so it doesn't actually have to be a proven offence. And they also tend to be taking decision making roles away from the judiciary and putting them into the hands of commissions or committees and things where, there's a change in the onus of proof, and there's a change in the degree of the burden of proof. And so this is moving us well away from our common law and our British legal system origins to come into this world of subjectivity and possibility and uncertainty.
Graham, the bar just keeps getting lower and lower. Kirralie, a quick response here, running out of time.
Yeah, absolutely fabulous comments, Graham. And important to note too that it's only some people's feelings that matter. It's not, very often we're told that males who identify as females feel very offended by my commentary, but there's no regard for my feelings and how offended I and other people feel of having those males invade our spaces. It is a very concerning thing, and it is through many other laws, the anti-vilification, anti-discrimination laws, becoming very subjective. That there's no way you can measure these things. There's no way you can produce the evidence, and yet they're being upheld in tribunals, courts of laws, and other places, and it really is disturbing.
Hey, Graham in Cleveland, thanks so much for your contribution. And the organisation that Kirralie leads is called Binary. She is standing up against the rampant campaign to degender Australian society. For listeners who want to connect with Kirralie, binary.org.au. There is an email subscription list that you can get. Kirralie sends out regular updates, and not only her own legal battles, but also insights into how this battle is going against this campaign to degender Australian society. It's about girls, it's about women. And my encouragement, as always, whenever we have a conversation like this with Kirralie, you might want to be one of those who gets that email regularly. You can become a subscriber. There's more than 100,000 email subscribers to the Binary organisation, binary.org.au. And no doubt there's always going to be financial issues. I think you said, Kirralie, your own legal costs somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000. There may be some listeners who might be able to be a friend to you and make a contribution as there as well, just so you can keep those things afloat. Binary.org.au. Kirralie Smith, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us once again today on 2020.
I always appreciate you, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.